A mountain man went hunting for meat, but instead found a woman half buried in the snow, whispering through blue lips. "Please, don't take it off." He carries her back through a blizzard to his lonely cabin, thinking he's saving her life. But when the firelight flickers against her skin, he sees something no decent man was ever meant to see. A mark burned deep into her shoulder, the seal of a U.S. cavalry brand. Who is she really? A runaway bride, or a traitor hiding from the law? As snow traps them together, secrets begin to thaw. Truths about a massacre, a preacher's silence, and the sins carved into the flesh of an innocent woman. He saved her once from the storm outside. But can he save her from the storm of her past? Because when that locket finally comes off, it won't just reveal her secret, it'll reveal his salvation, or his ruin. Will mercy be enough to melt the cold between them before the soldiers find her again? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The storm had come down the mountain like a living thing. It howled through the timber, carrying with it white sheets of snow that swallowed the trees, the trail, and the light itself. Carson Braddock pushed against the wind, one hand gripping the rope that led to his pack mule, the other shielding his face. The cold burned his lungs. It was the kind of storm that took foolish men to their graves. He wasn't foolish, just hungry. The traps he'd set along Pine Creek hadn't brought much meat in 3 days, and if he didn't check them now, he'd have nothing to trade when the trader's wagon came through next week. So he trudged on, snow up to his knees, cursing his own stubbornness and the lonely life that had made him this way. The mule stopped suddenly and gave a low, uneasy snort. Carson turned. "What's got into you, Sally?" The animal's ears pricked forward toward a drift near the creek. Something dark lay half buried in the snow. For a moment he thought it might be a dead deer, frozen stiff. But when the wind shifted, he saw the shape of a hand, pale, unmoving. Carson's heart kicked hard in his chest. He dropped the rope and knelt. Lord above. It was a woman. Her hair was frozen to her cheek, her dress thin as paper beneath a man's coat several sizes too big. Her lips were blue, her eyes closed, lashes crusted with ice. He touched her shoulder and felt the faintest stir of life. She whispered then, barely a breath. "Please, don't take it off." Carson froze, startled by the voice. He looked around, half thinking he'd imagined it, but the woman's fingers twitched, clutching something at her throat, a silver locket, half hidden beneath the coat. "Ma'am," he said, leaning close so she could hear over the wind, "you're near froze to death." No answer. Only that faint grip on the locket. He knew there wasn't time to think. The wind was cutting harder, and her skin was like ice. He gathered her up, surprised at how light she was, and hoisted her across his shoulders. "Hang on, ma'am. You're coming with me." Each step back toward his cabin was a battle. The mule followed, head down, snow crusting its mane. By the time the small cabin appeared through the storm, a squat shape half buried under drift, Carson's arms shook from exhaustion. He kicked the door open and carried her inside. The air was barely warmer, but at least the wind was gone. He set her gently on his bunk and went straight to work. Fire first. He stuffed kindling under the stove, struck flint, and soon the orange glow filled the room. When he turned back to the woman, she lay still, eyes closed. "Stay with me," he muttered, fetching his pot to melt snow on the stove. Her breathing was shallow, but it was there. He cut away the stiff fabric of her skirt, wrapped her in a wool blanket, and spooned warm broth between her lips. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered. "Where am I?" she rasped. "Safe enough," Carson said. "You're in my cabin near Pine Creek. I found you half frozen." Her eyes darted to the locket again, fingers trembling to hold it. "Don't take it off." "I ain't taking nothing," he said softly, raising both hands. "Just try to keep still." He could see fear in her eyes, a fear deeper than the cold. "Was you traveling alone?" he asked. She didn't answer. Only a tear slipped down her cheek. Carson felt something twist inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Pity, maybe even protectiveness. He fetched his old coat and laid it over her shoulders. "You rest," he said gruffly. "Storm'll pass by mornin'. Then we'll figure what to do." He sat by the stove through the night, watching the fire and listening to the wind batter the walls. The woman's breathing grew steadier. Once, near midnight, she mumbled something. A name, maybe, but he couldn't catch it. When dawn came, the storm was gone. The land outside lay white and silent, every pine limb bent under frost. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and boiled broth. The woman stirred again. Carson turned to her. "Easy now," he said. "You made it through the night." She blinked, dazed. "You saved me." "Just did what anyone ought to do." Her eyes softened. "No, not anyone would." He shrugged, uncomfortable under her gaze. "What's your name?" "Ava," she whispered. "Ava," he repeated. "All right, I'm Carson." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you, Carson." He poured more broth and handed her the tin cup. "Drink slow." She nodded and sipped, hands shaking. When she finished, he helped her sit up. The coat slipped from her shoulder, revealing a dark bruise across her collarbone. She yanked it back quickly. "Sorry," Carson muttered, looking away. She clutched the locket tight. "Please, it must stay on. Promise me." He nodded. "You got my word." Through the rest of that day, Eva slept off and on. Carson cleaned his rifle, mended a broken snare, and kept adding wood to the stove. The silence between them felt strange, not empty, but heavy, like both of them carried ghosts they weren't ready to name. When night came, he offered her the bunk again and made a bed for himself near the fire. She whispered a prayer before closing her eyes, soft words, half in thanks, half in fear. Carson listened, surprised at how long it had been since he'd heard another human voice in this cabin. He looked at the Bible on the shelf. It had sat there untouched for years. He stared a long while before finally blowing out the lamp. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows, but inside the warmth held. The mountain man, once frozen in his own grief, had brought home a stranger. And before long, that stranger's secret, the one tied to a silver locket, would thaw the coldest corners of his soul. By morning the storm had settled into a white hush. The pines wore heavy caps of snow. The creek ran slow under a skin of ice, whispering in the still air. Smoke from Carson's stovepipe climbed straight up, thin and blue, like a line drawn to heaven. Inside, the little cabin held steady warmth. The iron stove ticked as it breathed. A tin kettle sang soft. Carson moved quiet so as not to wake the woman. He set more wood in the firebox, laid a strip of venison on the griddle, and frowned at the thin cut. Meat was low. He would need to check his traps soon, but not yet. Not while she was weak. The woman, Eva, stirred under the wool blanket. Her lashes fluttered. She looked around as if she had lost her place in a dream. "Morning," Carson said. His voice came out rough, so he softened it. "You're safe." She blinked at the rafters, then at him, then at the stove. Her hand flew to her throat. The silver locket lay there, dull with frost tarnish and soot, but whole. She pressed it with her palm and let out a breath that sounded almost like a prayer. "I promised," Carson said, turning the meat with his knife. "It stays on." "Thank you," she whispered. He slid the meat to a tin plate, spooned beans beside it, and brought the plate to the table. "I reckon you can sit a spell. Let me help you." Ava tried to stand, but swayed. He put out a steadying hand, then pulled it back, unsure. She gripped the bunk frame and found her feet. The man's coat, his old trail coat, hung off her shoulders. It looked like it had been made for a bigger world than she could carry. She sat, and he set the plate in front of her, along with a cup of hot water. "Go slow," he said. "It'll sit right if you go slow." The first bite brought color to her cheeks. She ate careful as a church mouse, small bites, eyes on the food, thanks under her breath. Only when the edge of hunger eased did she look up. "You have been very kind." "Just what neighbors do," he said, then realized how odd the word sounded. There wasn't a soul within 10 miles of his place, save the trapper on the far ridge, and he was wintering downriver. "Do you live alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Been that way some time?" She waited, as if there might be more. When none came, she looked at her hands. "I am sorry for the trouble. I meant to keep going." "Through that blow?" He shook his head. "You'd have gone to your reward before noon." His tone came out sharper than he meant, so he eased it. "Storm like that ain't a measure of pride worth the price." She folded her fingers around the cup. They were red at the knuckles. "I did not know the mountain would turn so fast." "It does that." He glanced toward the door. "You got a plan for where you're headed?" She swallowed, and her hand rose almost by reflex to the locket. "Away," she said. "Just away." "From who?" he asked, and then wished he'd kept silent. It was none of his business, except he'd found her near dead, and once a man pulled someone from death's hand, their business tangled, like it or no. Eva looked at the stove for a long time, as if gathering heat into words. "A man in the mines," she said at last. "He sent for a bride. I answered. Then I learned what kind of home he kept." Her mouth tightened. "He wasn't kind. I left." Carson let that sit. He had seen men like that in camp towns. Work hard, drink hard, own hard. He knew what a woman might face in such a shack. Hunger, fists, the shame of always being less than the bottle. "You ran at night?" "I waited until he rode out," she said. "I had a small sack. The storm found me first." "That's how storms are," he said, "always finding folks when they feel most alone." Her eyes met his. "You speak as if you know." He nodded once, and that one nod reached back years, back to a long summer, fever, and a grave under a cedar tree. He did not push the thought further. Not yet. They ate in a quiet that did not feel empty. Outside, the day brightened. Light lay over the snow like a clean quilt. Carson stood, took 2 bowls, and filled them with hot water. "Let me see to your hands," he said. "Frost can trick you. It feels mended before it's truly mended." She gave her hands, shy but willing. He checked the skin, raw, not black. "You'll keep your fingers," he said. "Thank the Lord." "I do," she said softly. He wrapped her hands with strips torn from a clean flour sack. He had learned such care the hard way, far from any doctor. "You keep 'em warm and dry. No more fetching wood or water till I say." Her mouth twitched, a small smile that made her look younger than the worry in her eyes. "Yes, sir." He stood and cleaned the little table with a damp cloth, dried it, and set the cup back where her fingers could warm. He moved through the cabin with easy order, and she watched. How he stacked kindling by size, how he stored the rifle where he could reach it if trouble scraped the latch, how he kept his tools tied and oiled. There was a peace in his method. By midday, her strength had grown enough that she could sit straighter and speak without losing breath. They talked about small things, the way snow muffled the world, the sound of coyotes at dawn, how beans always tasted a little like the tin that held them. Now and then, she slipped a hymn under her breath, not words so much as the tune. It wound through the cabin like smoke, the kind that smelled of something sweet. "That one," Carson said, surprising himself. "My wife knew it. She'd sing it while supper simmered." The words had come before he meant them to. He stood with his back to her, pretending to check the stovepipe. Eva did not pry. She only said, "It is a good tune for a tired day." He nodded, grateful for her soft footing on his past. When the sun reached a hand over the far ridge, he pulled on his coat and hat. "I need to see to the traps. Won't be long. You should rest." Her fingers tightened at the locket. "Will you return soon?" "Before night." He paused at the door. "Latch it after me. If you hear anything you don't like, there's a shotgun by the flour barrel. It's loaded. Work the hammer smooth-like. Don't panic. It'll bark fine." She glanced to where he pointed, then back to him. "I hope I do not need it." "So do I." He stepped out into the white day and let the cold slap his face awake. The snow creaked under his boots. His dog, a rangy brown cur with wise eyes, trotted at his heel. "Come on, Buck," Carson said, and the dog wagged as if to answer, "I always do." He checked 3 sets along the creek. 2 held rabbit, 1 was empty. He reset springs with numb fingers and thought on the woman in his bed. A runaway bride with fear in her eyes, and a locket she would not let go. He reckoned there was more to it. The way she flinched when the coat slipped from her shoulder last night. The way she pleaded over that piece of silver. Something lay under that chain. Something harsh. He tried not to think of brands or soldiers, or the ugly ways men marked flesh to own it. The thought lodged anyway, like a burr under a blanket. By the time he returned, pale blue was rising at the edges of the sky. Smoke still curled from his stovepipe. When he lifted the latch, warm air and the smell of stew greeted him. He paused, surprised. "You shouldn't—" "I only stirred what you started," Eva said, standing by the stove with a wooden spoon. She had tied up the sleeves of the coat and moved slow, careful not to stretch her bandaged hands. "It seemed right to keep the pot from sticking." "Well," he said. "Much obliged." He set the rabbits on the little butcher block and made quick work of them, the blade flashing, and slowing in a rhythm practiced by years. He salted the meat and hung it near the heat to dry a little. They ate in soft lamplight. The stew was simple. Beans, a bit of venison, onion he'd tucked away last fall, and a pinch of sage. The taste was honest and good. Between bites, Eva glanced at the Bible on the shelf. It sat where it had for years, the leather cracked, pages thin as a bird's wing. "You keep a Bible," she said. "I kept," he said. "It keeps dust now. Would you mind if I read a line?" Her face held no push, only a gentle ask. He looked at the book. It felt like looking at an old friend across a long field. "You may." She rose, lifted it with both hands, and set it on the table. The locket winked at her throat in the lamplight. She opened to the middle, as if the book itself knew the way. "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee." Her voice was steady. "And through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee." She closed the book softly. "I learned that when my mother died. I say it when the night is big." Carson felt the words rise and fall inside him like slow tide. He did not answer. He did not trust his voice. After supper, he washed the bowls and set them to dry. He gave Buck a scrap and rubbed the dog's ears. The dog thumped his tail and lay down in his corner by the stove. "You can take the bunk again," Carson said. "I'll sleep by the fire." "I have strength enough for the pallet," Eva said. "You should rest proper. You rose many times in the night for me." He started to argue, then saw the look in her eyes. This, he understood, was dignity. A person needed to give what little they could so as not to feel like a burden. "All right," he said. "But you promise to wake me if you feel ill or hear a sound that turns your blood." "I promise." She spread the pallet near the stove, where the heat would hold. She laid his coat over it, then settled under the blanket. The flames wove slow light up the cabin walls. Carson set another log and watched the burn catch. He was not yet ready to close his eyes. After some minutes, she spoke into the quiet. "You asked where I was headed. I told you, away. That is true. There is more." She drew a careful breath. "I had a letter. The man who sent for me, he wrote he had land, a small house, steady work. He used fine words. When I came, the house was a shack near the mine road. He drank. He called me Purchase when he was angry. I fled. It is simple as that." "I'm sorry," Carson said, and meant it. He had no gift for fancy phrases, but the two plain words held weight. "Did he hurt you?" "Not with hands," she said. "With hunger, with words. Some hurts last longer." Her fingers rose again to the locket. "This was my mother's. It is all I have of her." "Then it stays," he said. He could have left it there. He should have left it there. But the thin edge of the brand he'd glimpsed last night cut back into his mind. He chose caution and kept his tone easy. "When the weather softens, I'll haul you to the agency station down valley, or to the preacher's stop. Folks there can help you find decent work if you wish, or a safe ride to somewhere else." She watched him with a look he could not read. Hope? Fear? "You would do that?" "Seems right." Her mouth shook. She bit the edge of the blanket to steady it, then let out a small laugh that was half sob. "Thank you." He nodded, uncomfortable with the feeling that rose like something tight in his chest had loosened by one notch. Rest now. He lay down on the bunk. He did not turn his back to the room, as was his habit. He watched the red eye of the stove and listened to the small sounds of a person not used to sleeping easy, the little shifts and hitches of breath when a nightmare nudges. Twice, when she stirred too rough, he said, "It's all right," and she eased. Near midnight, the wind picked up and rattled the loose shutter. Eva's eyes opened wide. "The door. It's the shutter," he said. "This place creaks like an old horse, nothing more." She lay still, then whispered, "I am grateful for walls tonight." "Me too," he said, surprised to hear it. The next day dawned clear and sharp. The cold made the cabin boards crack. Carson pulled on his boots and coat. "I'll cut wood and fill the barrel," he said. "You stay warm. If you need water, holler. I'll hear." She nodded. "I will sweep and tidy." "You'll sit," he said, with a half grin that showed in his eyes, if not his mouth. "You can tidy from sitting." The day moved in small, simple pieces. He split rounds and stacked them in a neat crib by the door. She mended a tear in his old shirt with small, careful stitches. When her fingers trembled, she stopped and warmed them around her cup. At noon, he brought in a drift log he'd been saving. The resin caught, and the fire roared glad. They spoke a little more as the hours passed. He told her where the creek bent around a group of black rocks, shaped like a bear and two cubs. She told him how her father once carved her a whistle from willow and taught her to call a bird close. He showed her where he set a snare near the rabbit run. She told him how to make broth richer with egg if ever he had one to spare. These were small things, but the telling and teaching stitched them into the same day. In the late afternoon, clouds climbed over the peaks like slow cattle. The light dimmed. Carson fetched in extra wood and set the lantern on the table with a clean wick. "Storm's coming back," he said. "A short one." Eva looked toward the door and then at the Bible. "A short one is long enough when a person is alone," she said. Her eyes came back to him. "I am not alone this time." He couldn't answer to that without saying too much. He only gave a short nod and set the latch bar beside the door where it could drop fast if needed. As dusk settled, snow began to move through the trees with a sound like silk pulled over rough boards. Carson laid rabbit meat in a pan and seared it till the cabin smelled of iron and fat. He lifted the skillet, tipped the grease to keep it from flaming, and laughed once, short and quiet, when Buck sneezed from the pepper. Eva laughed too, surprised at herself, and that easy note hung warm beneath the roof. They ate, and afterward she rose, crossed to the shelf and took the Bible down again. She set it before him. "Would you choose a line?" she asked. He stared at the book. He could feel the years between him and it like a fence, posts sunk in hard ground. He reached anyway. The leather felt like old bark. He fanned the pages, then stopped at random. His finger settled on a verse he did not go hunting for and yet found. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart," he read, the words catching. He cleared his throat and said it again, slower. "The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart." Eva bowed her head. "Amen." He closed the book and set it down. The stove hummed. Snow brushed the shutter with gentle hands. Somewhere, far off, a coyote called, and another answered, the sound thin as a silver wire stretched across the night. "Tomorrow," Carson said quietly, "I'll start a sled for the back trail. If the weather holds, we can make a try for the preacher's stop in a week or so." Her hand went to her throat. "Will there be questions?" "There are always questions," he said. "But there's a right way to ask and a wrong way. Elder Muir asks the right way. He keeps a kettle and a kind word for folks thin on both." "Elder Muir," she repeated, as if trying on the name. "A preacher." "A circuit man," Carson said. "Rides a loop through the camps. He's seen sorrow enough to know the sound it makes." She looked at the locket again, thumb tracing its edge. "Then I will meet him, when the road allows." "It will allow," he said, and this time it sounded like a vow. He banked the fire for the night. She made the pallet. Buck circled twice and found his place. Before she lay down, Eva stood with one hand on the back of the chair. "You have not asked about this," she said, glancing at the locket. "You have respected my plea. I want to say thank you." "You don't owe me that," he said, but the words warmed him anyway. "Perhaps not," she said, "but I wanted you to have it." He tipped his head, unsure how to hold thanks from a stranger who already felt less strange. "You sleep now." She lay down and tucked the blanket under her chin. He turned down the lamp. Night filled the gaps around the log walls, and the cabin lay like a small boat on a dark, frozen sea. Stout, creaking, safe enough for now. Carson did not sleep at once. He watched the banked coals breathe, red too, black and back to red. He listened to the gentle rise and fall of Eva's breath. And in that hush, he felt something he had not felt in a long while. Not just the quiet that comes when work is done, but the quiet that comes when a man has done one thing right, and the world, for a moment, agrees. Outside, the storm rattled the shutter and passed on, as storms do. Inside, the cabin at the edge of the world held two lives in its circle of light. morning would come. There would be more questions, more work, more cold. But for tonight there was warmth, and a promise made, and a promise kept. He closed his eyes at last, and the mountain rested with him. The day passed quiet and slow, as mountain days did when snow sealed the world in white. The wind had gentled to a sigh, carrying the faint crackle of settling drifts. Inside the cabin, the fire hummed, and the smell of stew clung to the air. Ava sat near the stove, darning a tear in one of Carson's old shirts with careful, trembling hands. Each motion was deliberate, as though the act itself steadied her. Carson whittled near the table, shaping a piece of pine into something that had no purpose but to keep his hands busy. His dog, Buck, lay sprawled by the fire, muzzle resting on his paws, ears twitching when wood popped. The kind of quiet that lived between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just cautious, like they were both learning how to breathe near another soul again. When Carson finally spoke, it was half to himself. "Never thought I'd see another person up here in January, let alone a lady." Eva didn't look up. "I didn't plan to be here either." He watched her needle pause mid-stitch. "You remember how far you'd gone when I found you? I'd been walking since sunup, maybe longer." She hesitated, pulling the thread through. "I remember trees, cold, then your voice." Carson nodded. "Storm took near everything else, I reckon." She glanced up, meeting his eyes for the first time that day. "Why do you live up here, alone?" He leaned back in his chair, knife pausing in his hand. The question wasn't unfair, but it cut deep all the same. "Used to be I had a wife. Fever took her. Town folks said I'd find peace down in the valley, but all I found was noise. So I came where peace don't talk back." Eva's face softened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She's with God. I'm the one who got lost." He tossed the pine scrap into the fire and stood. "You hungry?" "A little," she said, though the truth was her stomach still trembled from fear more than hunger. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, passing one to her. When she reached for it, the sleeve of the coat slipped, and he saw it again, the faint edge of a burn, a brand. She froze. "Please," she whispered, voice small as falling snow. "Don't take it off." Carson raised both palms. "I ain't touching nothing." Her eyes glistened with shame. "You saw." Didn't answer right away. He sat down across from her, slow and deliberate. "I seen plenty of scars. That one don't make you less of a person." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "You don't understand." "Maybe not," he said, quiet. "But I understand what it's like to carry a mark you never asked for." She looked up sharply, reading something in his face that he hadn't meant to show. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the fire moved, shadows dancing on the log walls like ghosts. When she finally spoke again, her voice trembled. "They said I was wicked, that I turned against good men." Carson set down his spoon. "Who said that?" But she only shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters to me," he said. "If it's men still hunting you, I need to know what kind." Her eyes darted to the window, as if expecting shadows in the snow. "Soldiers." The word fell like a stone. He frowned. "Army?" She nodded once, then turned away. "Please, I can't talk about it." Carson leaned back, jaw tight. There was more to her story, something foul enough that she couldn't bear the telling. But he saw the tremor in her hands, and knew pressing would do no good tonight. "Fine," he said, gentler now. "You don't owe me talk. You just owe yourself rest." Eva nodded, relief and sorrow mixed in her expression. She finished the last bite of stew in silence, then stood to wash the bowls. He offered to do it, but she insisted. "It's the least I can do," she said. By the time the dishes were clean, night had fallen deep and still. The wind whispered around the cabin's eaves, but the storm had eased. Eva pulled the blanket around her shoulders and sat near the fire, gazing into the flames. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked suddenly. "Back where?" "To town. To people." Carson thought of the towns below. Saloons with yellow windows, miners' laughter, church bells echoing off frozen peaks. "No," he said finally. "There's too much talk in town. Too many eyes looking at what ain't theirs to look at." She smiled faintly. "Then we're both fugitives in our own way." He chuckled softly. "Reckon we are." The fire popped, sending sparks up the stovepipe. Buck lifted his head and gave a quiet huff before settling again. Eva leaned her head against the wall, eyelids heavy. Carson watched her fight sleep. Her face, lit by the fire, looked both young and worn. The look of someone who'd carried fear too far, too long. He felt something in him stir. Not desire, but duty. "You can sleep easy here," he said. "Ain't no one coming through this snow tonight?" She nodded, her voice fading to a whisper. "Thank you, Carson." He sat by the stove long after she'd gone still. Outside, the night stretched wide and quiet. He could hear the creak under the ice, a slow heartbeat beneath the land. When he finally lay down, the fire burned low, painting the cabin in soft red light. He watched the locket rise and fall with her breath, and thought of how a man could be haunted not by ghosts, but by the living he failed to save. And for the first time in years, Carson whispered a prayer, not for himself, but for the stranger sleeping in his bed. The morning broke clear and cruelly cold. Frost clung to the inside of the cabin window like a lace. Carson stirred the ashes and built the fire back to life, his breath clouding in the air before the stove warmed. The smell of pine smoke and iron filled the room. Eva slept still, turned toward the wall. The light touched her hair, glinting like old gold where the frost had melted. She looked younger when she slept, but there was a tightness in her brow, the kind that didn't belong to dreams, but to memory. Carson moved quiet, setting a pot of snow to melt for coffee. He'd been up before dawn, stepping outside long enough to check the traps near the cabin. A fox had passed in the night, its tracks weaving between the pines. The mountains were calm again, but he felt a weight pressing on him heavier than the snow on the roof. When Eva stirred, she sat up slow, pulling the blanket close. "Morning," she said softly, voice rough with sleep. "Morning," he replied. "Coffee's near done?" She nodded, brushing her hair back. "You've been up long?" "Since first light." He poured her a cup and handed it over. "Storm cleared. I'll go check traps deeper down the trail after breakfast." She took the tin cup in both hands. "I'll keep the fire." He smiled a little at that. "You don't need to do more and rest." "I can manage," she said. "Doing helps me breathe." Carson understood that. Doing had saved him too, after grief had near buried him. He gave a slow nod. "All right then." They ate biscuits and beans in silence. The cabin's small window showed a world made new. Snow smooth as porcelain, the pines bending under their white coats. As he pulled on his coat, Carson looked over at her. "If anyone comes by, don't open the door till you hear my voice." She hesitated. "You expect someone?" "No," he said, tightening his gloves. "But I didn't expect you either." Her mouth curved in a sad sort of smile. "Fair enough." He left her with Buck, the dog already watching her like a guardian. The snow squeaked under his boots as he headed down toward the lower traps. His rifle hung over his shoulder, though he didn't expect game today. Mostly he needed time to think. Each step cracked through ice crust. The mountains around him were vast, endless. He breathed deep, the cold burning his lungs, and thought about the brand on Eva's shoulder, the faint shape he couldn't shake from his mind. He'd seen that mark once before, years back, when the cavalry came through a Ute camp to enforce order. They'd branded stolen horses, and a man accused of theft, with the same iron. He clenched his jaw. Whatever Ava had done, he knew that mark didn't come from justice. It came from cruelty. When he returned near noon, the smoke from his chimney rose straight up, meaning the wind had gone still. He stepped inside to find Eva sweeping the floor, Buck following every move. The room looked cleaner, the stove polished, the dishes stacked neat. "I told you to rest," he said. "I did," she said, smiling faintly. "Then I needed something to do." He hung his coat on the peg and thawed his hands near the stove. "Well, you made the place look better'n I ever did." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "It helps me forget for a while." Carson turned to face her. "Forget what?" Her fingers went to the locket at her throat. "The things I can't change." He wanted to ask more, but the look in her eyes stopped him. Not fear, but shame too deep for words. He nodded toward the window instead. "Weather's fair. We might have a few calm days before another blow." "That's good," she said softly. He sat down, pulled his Bible off the shelf, and stared at it a long time before opening it. She watched, curious. "You read?" he asked. "A little," she said. "My mama used to every night. She said it was how she spoke to the Lord when words ran out." Carson ran his thumb along the page edge. "I ain't spoke to him in years." "Then maybe he's been waiting for you to start again." Her voice carried no judgment, just quiet certainty. It stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in a long time. They spent the afternoon mending things. She sewed a torn blanket. He patched a cracked bucket handle. Small work, honest work. Every now and then she hummed under her breath, the same tune she'd hummed that first night. When evening came, the mountains blushed pink in the fading sun. Eva fixed supper, and they ate by lamplight. Afterward, she moved to the chair near the stove, holding her cup between both hands. "You said once you lost your wife," she said softly. "Do you mind if I ask what happened?" He set down his fork. "Fever. Took her quick. Wasn't nothing I could do. She was 24. Eva's eyes shimmered. "I'm sorry." "She's buried down by the aspen grove. Haven't gone back there in near 3 years. He paused. Couldn't stand the quiet without her voice in it. Eva nodded slowly. "I know that kind of quiet." She fell silent then, staring into the flames. Her thumb rubbed at the locket again. Finally, she whispered, "When a person's been branded, they don't just lose skin, they lose their name." Carson looked up sharply. "You want to tell me what happened?" Her lip trembled. "Not yet. Not until I can say it without shaking." He leaned forward. "Then don't rush it. You're safe here." She nodded, a tear escaping despite her effort. Later, when she lay down, Carson sat by the fire, listening to her breathing. He wanted to believe the worst was behind her, that whatever had put that mark on her was far away. But he'd learned the world had a way of finding what it wanted. He reached for the Bible again, thumb tracing the cracked spine. The words she'd spoken echoed in his mind. "Maybe he's been waiting for you to start again." He opened it at random and read by the flicker of firelight. "He healeth the broken in heart, and bindeth up their wounds." He shut the book gently, exhaling. Maybe the Lord wasn't done with him yet. Maybe the storm that had brought Eva Lee into his cabin wasn't a curse. but the start of something he couldn't yet see. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, quiet, steady, and for the first time in years, Carson didn't dread the sound. By dawn, the cabin smelled of coffee and pine smoke again. The wind had calmed, and the world outside lay still beneath the new snow, blue and silver under a cloudless sky. Carson stood by the doorway, pulling on his boots while Buck waited with tail swishing slow. "I won't be gone long," Carson said. "Traps near the ridge need clearing." Eva poured him coffee, her hands still wrapped in linen. "Be careful on the ice." "I've been careful my whole life," he said with a faint grin. Then he met her eyes. "I'll be back before midday." She nodded, though she still looked uneasy. Ever since she'd told him the word soldiers, her gaze had grown restless. She moved about the cabin like a bird listening for hawks. He stepped out into the cold, rifle slung, snow creaking underfoot. The air smelled clean, sharp, and full of quiet. By the time he returned, the sun had climbed high enough to soften the drifts. He caught sight of smoke rising straight from his chimney, a good sign. But something else hung in the air, faint and wrong, the sound of hooves. He stopped behind the last bend of trees. 2 horses stood outside the cabin. One mule looked familiar. Elder Jonas Muir's shaggy gray. The other horse bore a long saddlebag and a cross-bound staff, a preacher's sign. Carson relaxed his grip on the rifle. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, and stepped out into the clearing. Elder Muir turned at the sound, beard white with frost, eyes shining kindly beneath bushy brows. "Carson Braddock, I was hoping this was your place. You still breathing, son?" "Most days," Carson said. "What brings you up the ridge in January? You lost your senses?" The old preacher laughed, deep and genuine. "Lost 'em long before this winter." He swung down from his mule and stomped snow off his boots. "I was heading from the Pine Mission toward Durango, but that last storm drove me north. Thought I'd freeze in my saddle if I didn't find a roof." "Well, you found one," Carson said, clapping his shoulder. "Come in, got stew and fire enough." Muir grinned. "And company, I see." Eva had stepped to the doorway. She wore Carson's coat still, her face pale but calm. "Good afternoon, Reverend," she said softly. The old preacher tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Fine day to be alive." Eva smiled a little, though her eyes darted once toward Carson as if asking permission. He gave a nod. Inside, Muir thawed by the stove, while Carson fetched a tin bowl for stew. "You been traveling alone?" Carson asked. "Near a week," Muir said. "God saw fit to keep my mule upright and my coffee pot half full." He chuckled, then looked around the cabin. "You've kept her tidy. Didn't expect to find a woman's touch up here, though." Carson stirred the pot. "Didn't expect it either." Eva blushed and busied herself with setting cups. "I owe him my life," she said. "He found me in the snow." "Is that so?" Muir said, his tone softening. "Then the Lord sent him right on time." Eva lowered her eyes. "Maybe." They ate together, the warmth easing the edge off the day. The preacher spoke of the towns below, of folks preparing for spring planting. He told a story about a family near the valley who built a chapel with stones from a riverbed. Each one carried by hand, just for the joy of worship. Carson listened quietly. Eva smiled faintly. But then Muir's tone changed. "There's darker talk too," he said, stirring his cup. "Army riders came through the valley last week. Said they were looking for a deserter's wife. Some woman accused of traitor's work. Said she helped Utes escape a patrol." The air in the cabin shifted. Carson felt Eva go still beside him. Her hand slipped from the table to her lap, clutching the edge of her coat. Muir didn't seem to notice at first. I told the lieutenant I hadn't seen any such woman. He said she was dangerous, said she carried a branded mark as proof. Ava's breath caught sharp in her throat. She set down her spoon carefully. Did they say her name? The preacher shook his head. No name, just the mark. Carson glanced toward Eva. Her face had drained white. Reverend, he said quickly, you've been riding a long road. Eat more, talk less. Muir blinked, reading something in Carson's tone. His gaze moved between the two of them and softened. Aye, he said quietly. Long road indeed. The rest of the meal passed in careful silence. When they finished, Muir sat back and sighed. If you don't mind, I'd like to bed down here tonight. Storm's likely before dawn. Of course, Carson said. Plenty of space. Eva nodded, her voice faint. You're welcome. As evening fell, Carson stepped outside to fetch wood. The air had turned colder again, the sky hazy with low clouds. Buck padded beside him, tail stiff. When Carson returned, he found Muir sitting by the fire, reading from his Bible in low tones. Eva sat opposite, her hands clasped tight around the locket, eyes distant. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, Muir read. Then he looked up, meeting her gaze. That's from John. Folks forget that freedom ain't always comfort. Sometimes it's the hardest thing the Lord asks of us. Eva's lips trembled. Even if the truth kills you? Especially then, the preacher said softly. She looked down. Then I'm not brave enough. Muir closed his Bible. Courage don't mean you ain't scared, child. It just means you keep breathing while you are. Carson stood near the stove, saying nothing. He could see the storm in Eva's eyes. Whatever she carried, it was heavy, and now it had a name, the Army. When Muir finally settled into his bedroll, Carson stoked the fire once more. Eva lingered, staring into the flames. You heard him, she said softly. They're still looking. I heard, Carson said, and they ain't finding you here. Tears filled her eyes. You don't even know what I did. Maybe I don't need to, he said. All I know is you don't deserve a noose for what those men did to you. She turned away, shaking her head. You don't understand. They'll come. Carson looked at the rifle leaning by the wall. Then they'll meet a man who don't scare easy. Eva stared at him, trembling. They branded me, Carson. They called me a traitor. I don't care what they called you, he said, voice firm. You're safe under this roof. She covered her face with her hands. You can't promise that. He took a step closer. I just did. Outside, the first wind of the coming storm howled down the ridge, rattling the shutters. Buck lifted his head and growled low, as if warning that something unseen had begun to move. Inside, 3 souls sat in the flicker of firelight, a mountain man, a broken woman, and a preacher too weary to sleep. And somewhere in the dark below the ridge, soldiers were already on the march. Morning came gray and brittle. Snow drifted against the cabin door like piled feathers, and the sky hung low with more to come. Carson rose before the others, quietly stirring the coals to life and filling the kettle with snow. The wind outside whistled through the pines, thin as a needle. Eva slept fitfully, her lips moving in half-formed prayers. Elder Muir lay rolled in his blanket by the fire, one hand still resting on his open Bible. Carson watched them both for a moment before pulling on his coat and stepping into the dawn. The world was hushed. Not a bird sang. His traps waited somewhere below the ridge, but his mind wasn't on them. He thought instead of the preacher's words from the night before, "Truth shall make you free," and the way Ava's eyes had filled with fear. By the time he returned with a pair of rabbits, Smoke curled from his chimney again. He smelled coffee before he reached the door. When he stepped inside, Eva was stirring a small pot, the firelight catching her hair. Elder Muir sat nearby, reading aloud in his soft, gravelly voice. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. Eva listened, quiet but far away in thought. When she saw Carson, she offered a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Caught supper?" Muir asked. "Enough to keep us another day," Carson said. "Storm's closing in." He skinned the rabbits by the doorway, wiping the knife clean on a rag. Muir watched him for a time before closing his Bible. "You're still a steady hand, Carson. Your father would have been proud." Carson gave a faint shrug. "He'd say I stayed too long in the mountains." "Sometimes God puts a man where silence can do more than words," Muir said. Eva looked between them, her fingers twisting the chain of her locket. She seemed to wrestle with something unseen. When Muir stepped outside to water his mule, she turned suddenly to Carson. "I can't keep this from you any longer," she whispered. He straightened. "Keep what?" She swallowed hard, her hand clutching the locket. "The truth about this." He took a step closer but kept his voice soft. "Only tell what you can bear." Her eyes filled. "I was with the army once, at least near them. I did washing for the officers at Fort Garland. Captain Raymond Huxley commanded there. He was powerful. When the Ute families came down to trade, he called it a threat. He wanted to teach them fear." Her voice shook. "He ordered me to lure one of their families into a clearing, said it was for peace talks. But it was an ambush. I refused. I told them it was wrong." Carson's hands clenched. "And he branded me," she said, tears spilling over. "He said if anyone saw the mark, they'd know I was a traitor to the flag. Then he told the other soldiers I'd deserted my post to join the Utes. I ran before they could lock me in the stockade." She pulled open the locket and showed him what was inside, a folded scrap of burned paper, yellowed and brittle, stamped with the faded seal of the U.S. Cavalry. "It's part of a report he signed. I tore it from his desk the night I fled. It says he ordered the raid himself." Carson stared at the paper. The writing was faint, but the signature, R. Huxley, was clear enough. "You kept this all this time?" "It's the only proof of what he did," Eva said. "But if they find it, they'll destroy it. And me with it." Carson took a slow breath, the weight of her words pressing heavy in his chest. "You did right to run. Men like that hide behind uniforms. Seen plenty of it." She wiped her cheeks, trembling. "I thought if I could reach Durango, maybe I could give this to a judge. But the mountains, they closed in. I thought God had turned his face away." Carson shook his head. "God sent a storm to drop you in my path, that's all. Storms don't mean punishment. Sometimes they mean rescue." Her lips quivered into a fragile smile. "You really believe that?" "I do tonight." Elder Muir came back in, brushing snow from his shoulders. "Did I hear mention of Durango?" Eva stiffened. Carson glanced at her before nodding. "She's thinking that's where her truth belongs." Muir studied them both. "Then I reckon the Lord's working faster than my legs can travel. That's where I was bound before the storm." "You mean to go with her?" Carson asked. "If she's willing," Muir said gently. "The judge there's a fair man, knows the law of heaven better than the law of fear. If we can reach him come thaw, maybe justice will find its way." Eva's voice was small. "If the army doesn't find me first." Muir's gaze was kind but firm. "The Lord don't promise safety, child, only purpose." Carson turned toward the window. Outside, flakes had begun to fall again, drifting slow. "We'll need to wait till the pass is clear. Could be weeks." "Then we wait," Muir said. "Sometimes waiting's its own kind of faith." They spent the rest of the day in a strange peace. Ava mended one of Carson's blankets. Muir copied notes from his weather-worn journal. Carson chopped wood until his arms ached, the steady rhythm clearing his thoughts. By evening, the storm thickened. Snow hissed against the roof. Inside, the three sat close to the fire, each lost in their own prayer. Eva took the locket off briefly to clean the chain. Carson caught himself staring, not at the mark on her shoulder, though he saw it clear this time, ugly and cruel, but at the strength it took to live with it. She noticed his eyes and met them, unflinching. "It'll fade some, come spring," she said quietly. "It don't need to fade," he answered. "It's proof of a good woman's courage, not her shame." Her eyes shone. "You speak like a preacher." He smiled faintly. "Don't let Jonas hear you say that. Man's liable to hand me a Bible and a sermon." The preacher chuckled from across the fire. "Wouldn't hurt you none." They laughed together, soft but real, the sound warming the room more than the flames. That night, when the others slept, Carson sat by the fire, the locket resting on the table beside him. He opened it once more, reading the faint letters by the flicker of light. Captain R. Huxley, commanding officer. He whispered the name like a curse and a promise both. "Your day's comin', Captain," he said under his breath. "Truth don't stay buried forever." He closed the locket gently and laid it beside Eva's folded hands. Then he looked toward the dark window, where the storm pressed like a waiting crowd, and wondered how many more nights they'd have before the world came knocking again. The storm lasted 2 full days. Snow packed against the cabin walls so high that only the stovepipe and the faint curl of smoke betrayed life inside. The wind howled through the pines like 1,000 voices that wouldn't rest. Inside, they kept close to the fire, each tending to silence in their own way. On the 3rd morning, the sun returned, gold and sharp. The air outside hung still, clean as glass. Carson cracked open the frozen door with his shoulder and let a spear of light cut into the room. "Sky's clear," he said, half in relief. "We made it through again." Ava, sitting near the fire with the locket in her hands, smiled faintly. "Another mercy, then." "Another mercy," he echoed. Elder Muir rose stiffly from his corner, stretching his legs and groaning at the pop of old joints. "The Lord's got his own kind of humor," he said. "He sends storms to drive sinners to saints, and saints to sinners. Never could tell which one I am." Carson chuckled. "Depends what day you ask." Eva's smile lingered, though her eyes looked far away. "Some days I feel both." The preacher studied her face. "You've seen the inside of cruelty, child. But cruelty ain't sin when you're the one suffering it. Guilt's a sly thing. It can live where it don't belong." Ava swallowed. "I still feel it. Every time I close my eyes, I see that fire. I hear the screaming. And I wonder if I'd obeyed, if maybe the killing wouldn't have happened." Carson shook his head. "Don't you carry his blame. That man carved his own mark on the world long before he carved one on you." Muir sat beside her and set his hand over hers. "Truth spoken don't ease the heart right away. It comes slow like thaw. But it comes." Eva's eyes brimmed. "How do you know?" The preacher looked into the fire. "Because I've been waiting on my own thaw a long time." Carson frowned. "You mean that talk from the other night?" Muir nodded. "I once baptized Captain Huxley. Thought he was a soldier of faith. I knew his temper, heard whispers of what he'd done to the tribes, but I told myself it wasn't my place to question a man of rank." His voice cracked with shame. "My silence bought me sleep for a few years, but the Lord's kept me restless since." The cabin grew still. Even Buck lifted his head as if listening. Eva stared at the preacher. You knew him. I did. Knew what he was becoming, and I said nothing. That's why I was headed to Durango, to lay my testimony before Judge Harper. I aim to confess my part, however small. Tears slid down Eva's face. Then maybe there's hope for me too. There's more than hope, Muir said. There's forgiveness. It's the one thing no army can burn away. Carson stood, pacing the narrow floor. The preacher's confession struck something deep in him, a mix of fury and awe. Then we all got reckoning to do, he said. I've been hiding from the world same as she's been running from it. He looked out the window at the snow-wrapped trees. Maybe the Lord sent both of you here to drag me out of my hole. Maybe he sent you to drag us out, Muir said, smiling. Eva let out a small laugh through her tears. Seems he's done both. The three spent the rest of the morning planning. When the thaw came, they would ride together for Durango, Eva with the locket, Muir with his testimony, and Carson as their guard and guide. The passes would be treacherous till spring, but Carson knew the trails by heart. While Muir sketched the route in the dirt floor with a stick, Carson stepped outside to split wood. The sound of his axe echoed through the stillness, ringing off the frozen ridge. Each strike steadied his heart. The air was cold enough to sting but full of promise. When he came back in, Eva was humming softly, stirring soup on the stove. The tune was that same hymn again, gentle, sad, and full of light. Muir listened with his eyes closed, head bowed as if in prayer. After supper they sat together by the fire. The preacher spoke quietly about redemption and truth. Carson said little, but his gaze kept finding Eva's face, calm and strong in the glow. She'd stopped trembling when the wind blew. She no longer flinched when the logs popped in the fire. Later, after Muir had turned in, Eva lingered by the window. The mountains don't feel so empty anymore, she said. They never were, Carson said, coming beside her. You just needed someone to hear the echo. She looked at him, eyes shining. You've given me more kindness than I deserve. He met her gaze steady. You deserve every bit. Outside, the stars burned clear and sharp through the cold sky. The storm had scrubbed the heavens clean. For the first time since the blizzard, they both felt something close to peace. When Eva finally lay down, Carson stayed awake a while longer, watching the glow of the coals fade. He thought of his wife's grave under the cedar tree down valley, and how grief had frozen him in place for so long. But tonight, warmth had returned to the cabin, and to his heart. It wasn't love yet, not quite. It was something deeper, slower. Hope. He bowed his head and whispered into the quiet. Thank you for bringing her here, Lord. However it ends, thank you. Then, for the first time in years, he slept without dreams. The days that followed moved gentler than the ones before. The snow softened in the daylight, crusting over at night, but melting slow under the high mountain sun. Water trickled from the eaves, whispering of spring. Inside the cabin, the air changed too, less heavy, more human. Carson woke before dawn most mornings, splitting wood or checking traps while the world was still blue and silent. By the time he came back, the smell of coffee filled the cabin. Eva always had the stove going, her sleeves rolled, her hands red from work but steady. Elder Muir read quietly by the window, glasses perched low on his nose, his breath fogging the glass as he studied the scripture. Once, Carson returned to find the two of them kneeling side by side, heads bowed in prayer. He paused in the doorway, the sound of their voices low and even. It stirred something in him, a sense of home he hadn't felt since before the fever took his wife. When they rose, Muir looked up and smiled. We were thanking the Lord for safe company. Carson nodded. Then I'll thank him for that, too. That morning, they shared breakfast of rabbit stew and fresh biscuits. Eva laughed softly when Buck nudged her elbow, begging for scraps. The sound filled the small room with warmth. "He's as bad as a child," she said. "He's worse," Carson replied with a grin. "A child you can reason with." Her laughter caught him off guard, bright and alive. He hadn't realized until that moment just how much the silence of grief had become part of him. Hearing her laugh was like opening a door and remembering sunlight. After breakfast, Muir cleaned his Bible pages, humming a hymn. Eva washed dishes while Carson fixed a broken latch on the door. The cabin smelled of soap and iron, pine smoke and biscuits, the kind of smells that meant living, not just surviving. When the chores were done, Eva stood near the stove and said, "I could make bread if we had more flour." Carson glanced toward the barrel. "Might be enough for one good loaf. You bake, I'll trade next time the wagon comes through." "You trust me not to burn it?" she teased, smiling. "I trust you more than I trust myself with an oven." Muir chuckled from his chair. "That's the sound of civilization coming back to a man's life." Carson tipped his hat back and grinned. "Reckon it is." While Eva worked the dough, Muir spoke about his travels. "I met a Ute woman down the valley last summer, Lena Whitebird, sharp as a hawk and twice as patient. She keeps herbs that heal frostbite faster than any doctor. Helped a boy once who near lost his hands." Carson nodded. "I know of her. She lives near Canyon Spring. Folks say she's half angel, half coyote." Eva's brow lifted. "Half coyote?" He smiled faintly. "Means she don't scare easy and don't answer to fools." "Sounds like someone I'd like to meet," Eva said. "You might," Muir replied. "She's kind to anyone who's kind back. I plan to stop by her place when we head down come thaw. Might do to ask her blessing for the road." "Blessing?" Eva asked. "Herbal poultice, more like," Muir said, chuckling. "But the Lord uses many hands." The days rolled on like that. Soft work, quiet words, slow healing. Ava's hands grew steadier, her cheeks warmer. Sometimes she sang while scrubbing clothes by the door, old hymns with verses Carson half remembered from his childhood. At night, they shared stories. Muir told tales from his years riding circuit, baptizing miners in rivers cold enough to steal breath, marrying couples in schoolhouses half-built, preaching to men with whiskey on their breath but tears in their eyes. Eva listened with quiet awe, eyes glowing in the lamplight. Carson spoke less, but when he did, his words came deep. He told of losing his wife, of the silence that followed, of the days when even the wind felt like it judged him. "You're not alone in that silence," Muir said softly. "Most men find God not in words, but in the space between them." Eva reached across the table and touched Carson's rough hand. "And maybe in kindness, too." He met her gaze, something steady passing between them. "Maybe that's the same thing." By the end of the week, the cabin truly had changed. What once felt like a cave now felt like a home. Eva had scrubbed the windows till they caught the light. Muir had built a little shelf for his Bible and journal. Carson even patched the leak in the roof he'd been ignoring for 2 winters. One evening, while the sun sank behind the ridge, Carson went outside to bring in wood. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with purple and gold. From inside, he heard Eva singing again, not a hymn this time, but a tune he didn't recognize. It was softer, fuller. He stopped to listen, leaning on the axe handle. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the weight of loneliness pressing down. He just stood there, breathing in the cold, listening to her voice rise and fall with the firelight flickering through the window. When he went back in, Muir was dozing in his chair, and Eva was feeding Buck the crust of a biscuit. She looked up and smiled. "You were gone a while." "Had to listen," he said. "To what?" He hung his coat, his eyes warm. "To the sound of peace." Ava's smile faltered for a heartbeat, then returned stronger. "It's been a long time since I've heard that too." Muir stirred, half awake. "Peace don't stay unless you keep it fed," he murmured. Carson nodded. "Then we'll keep it fed." That night, as they banked the fire, the wind began to stir again. The shutters rattled once, twice. Carson paused. "Another storm?" Eva asked quietly. He shook his head. "No, not yet. But riders, maybe." Her face paled. Muir lifted his head. "Could be nothing. Could be hunters from the valley." "Could be soldiers," Carson said grimly. He reached for his rifle and checked the chamber, then set it beside the door. "We'll keep the lamps low tonight." They blew out the firelight until only the coals glowed. In the dim red flicker, the three sat still, listening. Outside, faint and distant, came the sound of horses, slow, steady, moving through snow. Eva's hand went to her throat. "They found me." "Maybe," Carson whispered. "Maybe not. But we'll be ready." The hoofbeats passed, fading towards the lower ridge. No voices followed. No lantern light appeared between the trees. Only silence returned. After a long moment, Eva let out a shaky breath. "They're gone." "For now," Carson said. He looked out the window, jaw tight. "But that peace we've been feeding, we'll have to guard it now." She nodded, eyes wide in the half-dark. "Then we guard it together." He reached out, resting his calloused hand over hers. "Together." Outside, the horses moved farther into the valley, leaving only the hush of snow behind. Inside, the small cabin held steady against the dark, three hearts bound by faith, fear, and the quiet strength of shared hope. Winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains. Icicles melted and dripped from the cabin roof like silver threads. The creek below, long silent under its icy lid, began to murmur again. Birds came back, calling across the timber. Each morning the air held a new scent, thaw, sap, and something like hope. Inside the cabin, Eva smiled more. Her hands had healed, her cheeks glowed, and sometimes Carson caught her humming without knowing it. She mended his shirts, brushed Buck's coat, and once even dared to open the door wide while she swept, letting sunlight spill across the floorboards. Carson stood outside that morning, sharpening his knife on the porch rail, watching her through the doorway. The sight brought him an ache he didn't have words for. It wasn't the old pain that had followed him since his wife's death. It was softer, like new grass pressing through frost. Elder Muir noticed, too. "Looks like the Lord's thawing more than snow," he said with a smile, setting down his cup of coffee. Carson shook his head, embarrassed. "Don't start with that, Jonas." "Just saying," Muir replied. "A cabin's only wood till laughter fills it." "Then we're halfway to a home," Carson said. A week passed in that gentle rhythm. The three moved like a small family, splitting chores, sharing stories, and marking each day of clear sky as a gift. Eva began writing names in the air with her finger sometimes, as though tracing memories she wanted to keep. One morning she said, "I want to learn how to ride." Carson blinked. "You ever been on a horse?" "Only once," she said, smiling. "When I came west, I fell off before we reached the fort." He laughed quietly. "Then we best start slow." They led his old mare, Sadie, out to the clearing behind the cabin. The snow there had thinned to damp patches of brown grass. Carson showed her how to hold the reins, how to keep her heels down. "Balance is the trick," he said. "Don't fight the horse. Move with her." Eva climbed into the saddle, nervous but determined, The mare shifted, snorting, but Carson steadied the bridle. "Easy now," he said. "Let her feel you." Ava's hands trembled. "She feels me shaking, I'm sure." "That's all right," Carson said with a small grin. "She's kind. Been carrying my foolishness for years." At first she rode only a few steps, clutching the horn, cheeks flushed. But as minutes passed, her fear softened. The mare obeyed her gentle tugs. She even laughed. A bright, sudden sound that startled a crow from a nearby tree. When she finally dismounted, breathless, she looked up at Carson. "I did it." "You did," he said. "And you didn't fall once." Muir clapped from the porch. "We'll make a frontier woman of you yet." Ava grinned. "One step at a time, Elder." That afternoon, the sky turned soft and blue, the kind that promised a kinder season ahead. Ava and Carson sat on the porch steps while Muir wrote in his journal. "You ever think about what comes after Durango?" Carson asked. Ava turned the locket in her fingers. "I think about it every night. I want to clear my name, but after that—" She hesitated, watching sunlight flicker on the melting snow. "I'd like to live near trees, maybe teach children. My mama taught letters to the younger ones back home." "That'd suit you," he said. "And you?" He took a long breath. "Never thought much past tomorrow, but maybe I will now." She smiled. "Then we'll make plans together." 2 days later, while chopping wood near the tree line, Carson spotted movement on the far ridge. A single rider. He squinted into the light. The man wore a long coat, horse weary from travel. When the rider saw him, he raised a hand. Carson's stomach dropped. The cut of that coat, the shine of brass buttons, army issue. He ducked behind a tree and watched. The rider didn't come closer. He only studied the valley, then turned his horse and disappeared behind the next hill. Carson returned to the cabin fast, boots crunching through thaw. Ava saw his face and went still. "What is it?" "Rider," he said. "Army, by the look of him." Muir rose slowly. "Could be a patrol or could be worse." Eva's fingers went to her locket. "They've found us." "Maybe not yet," Carson said. "But they will if we stay too long. Word travels fast once snow melts." Muir nodded grimly. "Then it's time we start our journey to Durango." They spent the next day preparing. Carson repaired the sled and packed dried meat, flour, and salt. Muir readied his mule and gathered his papers. Ava sewed extra lining into her coat. When she looked at the road stretching south, her jaw trembled, but her eyes held steady. "I'm ready," she said. "You sure?" Carson asked. She gave a small, brave smile. "I'd rather die telling the truth than live running from it." He gripped her hand once, firm. "Then I'll see you through it." That night, they ate supper in silence. Wind whistled low through the eaves, and the fire burned bright, steady, brave, like the three souls around it. When Eva rose to bank the coals, Carson caught her eye. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "We leave with first light." She nodded. "Tomorrow." But just before dawn, when the first thin light crept through the cracks, the world outside changed again. From far down the valley came the echo of hooves. Not one horse this time, but many. The sound rolled through the trees like thunder. Ava jolted upright. "Carson! I hear it!" He was already pulling on his coat, grabbing the rifle. Muir stood at the window, face pale in the half-light. "Riders, 6, maybe more." Carson's jaw set. "Soldiers." Buck growled low. Ava clutched the locket, whispering, "Dear Lord, not yet." The hoofbeats grew louder. The first trumpet of a horse whinny split the dawn. Carson stepped toward the door, eyes narrow. "We'll hold fast till they pass. If they don't pass—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The promise of spring had come, but so had the shadow that followed it. The first hoofbeats shook the ground before dawn. They came up the ridge fast, muffled by wet snow but fierce enough to rattle the cabin shutters. Carson was already at the window, rifle in hand. The world outside was gray-blue, the sky heavy with mist. Ava clutched her locket with both hands, knuckles white. "Carson?" "I see them," he said. 8 riders. He watched through the frosted glass as the first horses crested the ridge, their breath clouding like smoke. Their blue coats told the rest. "Army." Elder Muir stood beside him, calm but pale. "They're coming for her." Carson's jaw set hard. "They'll have to go through me." The hoofbeats drew closer, the sound of harness and steel echoing through the trees. Buck barked once, low and furious. Carson moved fast, dousing the lamp with his sleeve. The cabin dimmed to ember light. "Stay behind the stove," he told Ava. "If they force in, I'll stall them. You don't speak, you don't move." Her voice cracked. "They'll kill you if you stand in their way." "Better me than you," he said simply. Muir laid a hand on Carson's arm. "Let me talk first. I've still got a preacher's collar, even if it's worn thin." Carson nodded once, though his eyes never left the window. Outside, the soldiers fanned out across the clearing, rifles drawn. The lead man dismounted, a hard-faced sergeant with a scar down one cheek. His uniform bore mud and pride in equal measure. He hammered on the door. "Open up in the name of the United States Cavalry." Carson opened the latch, slow, stepping out onto the porch. "You found me. What's the fuss about at this hour?" The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "You harboring fugitives?" "Only a preacher and a hound," Carson said coolly. Behind the sergeant, a younger trooper looked uneasy. "Sir, we don't know if—" "Quiet, Whitfield," the sergeant snapped. He turned back to Carson. "We got orders to retrieve a woman accused of aiding enemies of the government. Name's Eva Huxley." Carson felt his pulse thrum. "Ain't no woman like that here?" The sergeant stepped closer. "Funny, fresh footprints say otherwise." Carson's rifle was slung over his shoulder, but his hand stayed loose near the stock. "You got a warrant?" "This is the warrant," the sergeant said, tapping the star on his chest. "Step aside." Before Carson could speak again, the door burst open behind him. 2 soldiers shoved past, sweeping the cabin. Eva screamed as one of them grabbed her arm. "Found her, sir," the soldier called. "Hiding by the stove." Carson lunged, but the sergeant swung his rifle butt hard, striking Carson in the ribs. He hit the porch rail, gasping. Buck barked and snarled, teeth flashing, before a soldier kicked him back. Ava struggled in the soldier's grip, tears streaking down her face. "Please don't!" "Quiet, traitor," the sergeant spat. He yanked the locket from her neck and held it up. "So this is what you're clutching like salvation? Give that back!" she cried. He grinned cruelly. "You'll have no need for trinkets where you're going." Then, before anyone could stop him, he tossed the locket straight into the stove. The chain hissed as it hit the flame, curling in the heat until the metal turned red. "No!" Eva screamed, lunging forward. Muir caught her before she could reach it. The smell of burning metal filled the cabin. Carson staggered upright, rage rising through his pain. "You got no right!" "I got every right," the sergeant barked. "Orders from Captain Huxley himself." At that name, Eva froze, trembling from head to toe. "Huxley," she whispered. "He's alive?" The sergeant smirked. "Alive and well, ma'am. Waiting for you in Durango?" Carson's grip tightened on his rifle. "That man's a devil." The sergeant sneered. "Call him what you like. He wants his property back." Muir stepped between them. "She ain't property, sir. She's a woman wronged by your command. You'll answer to the Almighty if you harm her again." The sergeant's eyes flicked to him. "You best step aside, preacher." I'll step aside when truth does, Muir said firmly. That earned him a blow across the jaw with the butt of a carbine. The old man fell hard, blood on his lip. Carson roared. He swung the rifle up, but a soldier grabbed him from behind. The two struggled, slamming against the doorframe. Snow whipped in through the open door, stinging cold against Carson's face. He managed to wrench free long enough to slam the butt of his gun into the soldier's gut. "Enough!" the sergeant shouted. "Tie him!" Two men pinned Carson's arms, forcing him to his knees. Eva was dragged out into the snow, barefoot, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Muir tried to rise, clutching his Bible, but another soldier kicked it from his hand. Carson met Eva's eyes as they shoved her onto a horse. "Don't give up," he rasped. "Don't you give up." She shook her head, sobbing. "Carson!" The sergeant swung into his saddle. "Captain Huxley wants her alive. The rest of you ain't worth the trouble." He raised a hand, and the patrol turned, riding, off into the pale dawn. Snow sprayed from their horses' hooves as they vanished down the trail. Carson fell forward into the snow, gasping. The cabin behind him burned faintly from the open stove, smoke curling out the door. Muir staggered to his feet, limping toward him. "Son, are you—" Carson shook his head. "I'm fine." His eyes burned with fury and something deeper, grief. "But she's not." He looked toward the trail, faint hoofprints cutting through the trees. The world seemed to narrow to that single path. Muir put a trembling hand on his shoulder. "They'll hang her before the judge sees the truth." "Not if I get there first," Carson said. He stood, chest heaving, every muscle aching. "They took her locket, burned it, but there's more to proof than paper." Muir nodded. "Then we ride, tonight." Carson met his eyes. "You sure, old man?" "I've walked behind guilt too long," Muir said. "Time I walked beside justice." They went inside, tending to Buck's wound, gathering supplies, and quenching the fire. The cabin smelled of smoke and iron, of loss and resolve. When Carson fastened his rifle to the saddle, his eyes caught the stove. The locket had melted, but something small and bright glimmered in the ash, a silver clasp, half intact. He reached in with the poker and pulled it free. The letters R.H. still shone faintly through the soot. He turned to Muir. "Proof survived the fire." Muir's eyes widened. "Then the Lord's hand is still in this." Carson nodded, gripping the clasp tight. "Let's go get her back." As they rode into the falling snow, the first light of morning spilled over the mountains, pale, cold, and fierce. The cabin still smoked when the sun climbed over the ridge. Carson stood in the doorway, the silver clasp blackened but unbroken in his palm. The world smelled of ash and sorrow. Buck limped to his side, muzzle dusted with frost, eyes dark as grief itself. Elder Muir sat on a stump outside, wiping blood from his chin with a rag. His breath came slow, each word forced through pain. "She's gone, son." Carson nodded once, jaw set tight. "Not for long." He turned back into the cabin. The place looked hollow now. Her sewing kit on the table, the cup she always used, the quilt folded by the bed. He touched the back of the chair where she used to sit, then closed his hand around the clasp. The letters R.H. still shone through the soot like a brand of truth. Muir limped in behind him. "That bit of silver's all we got left of her proof." "It's enough," Carson said. "I'll carry it to Durango if I have to crawl the whole way." The preacher shook his head slowly. "You can't ride half-blind on fury, Carson. You'll burn out before you reach her." Carson met his eyes. "Fury's all I got left to burn." He shoved supplies into a pack, dried meat, cartridges, rope, and water. His movements were hard, controlled. like a man building his own gallows, one board at a time. They'll stop at the old mining post to water the horses. She'll be there a day, maybe less. We can catch 'em by dusk. Muir rose unsteadily. Then I ride with you. You're hurt. I've been hurt longer than you've been alive, Muir said, tightening his coat. Let's move before the trail ice is over again. Carson looked once more at the small cabin, the life they had started to build. The stew pot still sat on the stove, blackened from the soldiers' boots. He poured a ladle of water over the embers and whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for the days you gave us. I'll see her safe again, or die clean tryin'." They rode out by noon, the horses crunching through snow so bright it made their eyes water. The air cut sharp but clear. Behind them, smoke drifted from the chimney like a last goodbye. For hours they said little. The mountains closed around them, cold and silent. Near sundown, they stopped at a ridge overlooking the trail below. Tracks, deep, fresh, and many, scarred the snow. Carson pointed. They passed through not 2 hours ago. Muir squinted into the fading light. Then the Lord's still leadin'. Carson touched the clasp in his pocket, feeling its weight against his thigh. No, he said quietly. He's watching to see what we do with it. Then he spurred his horse forward, wind stinging his eyes, heart pounding with something fierce and holy, part rage, part hope. The mountain swallowed them both as dusk fell, leaving only the thin line of their tracks behind, running straight toward justice. The trail wound down through narrow passes where snow clung to every pine limb. Carson rode ahead, his coat stiff with frost, his rifle slung across his back. Elder Muir followed close, hunched in the saddle, whispering small prayers that vanished into the cold air. Neither man spoke much. The only sound was the steady crunch of hooves and the wind's hollow cry through the canyon. By mid-morning they reached the frozen creek bed. There, among the ice, they found the soldiers' tracks, deep, sharp prints of shod horses leading south. Carson crouched beside them, gloved hand brushing the marks. They stopped here to water, he said. That means they're half a day ahead. Muir nodded. Then we ride till dark. They pressed on. The mountains opened into wide meadows where the sun hung low and gold, setting fire to the snow. Carson's breath came heavy, but his eyes never strayed from the path. Each hoofprint in the ice was another beat of his heart, another reminder of Ava's voice crying his name as they tore her away. When night fell, they camped in a hollow beneath a rock ledge. Muir lit a small fire, its flame trembling against the wind. "You ever think what you'll do when you reach them?" he asked. Carson stared into the blaze. "I ain't riding to kill, Jonas. I'm riding to prove." The preacher nodded. "Good. Vengeance makes men blind, but truth sees in the dark." They ate cold meat and drank melted snow. Above them, stars burned like pinholes through the sky. Carson took the silver clasp from his pocket, turning it in his fingers. The engraved letters glimmered faintly in the firelight. "She believed this meant something," he murmured. "Proof that the world still keeps records of right and wrong." Muir watched him. "She's right. That mark might bring justice, but your courage'll carry it there." Carson looked toward the southern horizon. "She's scared now. I can feel it." The preacher's face softened. "Then we ride faster come dawn." They slept little. Before sunrise, they mounted again, their horses' breath fogging in the pale light. The land began to change. Less snow, more rock and scrub. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, a mining post or a camp. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the settlement. A handful of low buildings clung to the frozen earth. A saloon, a stable, a shack flying a tattered army flag. Carson's eyes narrowed. That's them. Muir gripped his reins. And her? There, Carson said, pointing. Through the wavering heat, a line of riders dismounted near the post. Between them, a woman in a torn coat stumbled forward. Eva. Carson's pulse thundered. They're taking her inside. Muir's jaw tightened. Then it's time. Carson drew a deep breath. We wait till the sun drops, then we bring the truth out into the open. He looked once more at the clasp in his palm, cold and shining, then slid it back into his pocket. Hold on, Ava, he whispered. I'm coming. Dusk bled across the mining post like a slow fire. Smoke curled from the saloon chimney, and the flag above the barracks hung limp in the still air. Carson and Elder Muir waited in the shadow of a bluff, their horses tied behind scrub oak. Below, soldiers gathered near the stockade, their laughter carrying cold through the valley. A lantern flickered by the door, and in its dim light, Carson saw her, Ava, hands bound, head bowed, guarded by 2 troopers. His breath caught. She's alive. Muir placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Then the Lord's still writing this story. Carson's fingers brushed the silver clasp in his pocket. And he gave us proof. As the last light drained from the sky, a trumpet sounded. A summons. The soldiers dragged Ava toward the center of camp, where a tall figure stood waiting, his blue coat gleaming with brass buttons. Even from this distance, Carson knew him. Captain Raymond Huxley. He was older than the stories, but the arrogance had aged well. He carried himself like a man certain the world belonged to him. Carson's jaw clenched. That's him. Muir nodded grimly. Then truth's about to have its day. They waited until the lanterns lit the camp. Then, with hearts steady and steps sure, they rode down into the valley. Hooves broke the silence, and heads turned. Who goes there? A sentry barked, rifle raised. Friends of the accused, Muir said calmly. His voice carried like a church bell through the cold air. Huxley turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Well, well, if it isn't Elder Muir, didn't expect to see the Lord's mouthpiece riding in with a rifleman. I ride with truth, Muir said, dismounting, and truth rides armed when lies draw first. A murmur rippled through the gathered men. Eva lifted her head, her eyes widening when she saw them. Carson, she whispered, disbelief breaking into a sob. Easy now, he said, stepping forward, rifle slung but ready. We're here to end this right. Huxley sneered. End it. You've walked into the lion's den, boy. Carson's voice was calm. Cold. I've hunted lions before. The captain's laugh was thin. You think you can out-talk justice? This woman betrayed the United States Army, cost men their lives. She'll hang come sunrise. She refused your order to murder innocents, Carson said. That ain't treason. It's salvation. The soldiers shifted uneasily. One young corporal looked from Huxley to Carson, doubt flickering in his eyes. Elder Muir stepped forward, Bible in hand. Captain, I baptized you once. I prayed for your soul when you led men against those who could not fight back. And I've carried the guilt of my silence ever since. But no more. Huxley's face tightened. Watch your tongue, preacher. I will, Muir said, voice rising. I'll use it to name the truth. You branded an innocent woman to hide your sin. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Huxley's hand went to his pistol. Enough! But Carson drew faster, rifle raised, not aimed to kill, but to command attention. You'll let him finish. Huxley froze, rage burning behind his eyes. Muir reached into his coat and drew out the small silver clasp, still marked R.H. He held it high. This came from her locket, the one your man burned to ashes. Your initials, Captain, your seal, proof of your own confession. The corporal stepped forward. Sir, That's your mark. Stand down, soldier, Huxley barked, but his voice cracked. Carson's words cut through the cold like a blade. You branded her a traitor to keep your hands clean. You killed those people, and you burned her name to hide it. Silence. Only the wind moved. Then, slowly, Ava lifted her head. He said I was nothing, she whispered. That no one would ever believe me. Muir turned toward the men gathered there. You believe her now, don't you? The corporal lowered his rifle. Aye, sir, I do. More soldiers followed, shifting, ashamed. The truth had a weight that could not be silenced. Huxley looked around, realizing his command had cracked. His pistol shook in his hand. He turned toward Ava, face twisted in fury. You think you've won, girl? Carson stepped between them. She didn't have to win. She just had to tell the truth. Huxley lunged, but the corporal struck his arm, wrenching the weapon away. The gun hit the dirt, and the men closed in. The captain's voice broke as they shackled him. You'll regret this, every one of you. No, Muir said softly. We'll remember it. The preacher bowed his head, whispering a prayer of mercy, not for victory but for peace. Eva fell into Carson's arms, trembling with relief. The crowd parted as the marshal from Durango, summoned by telegraph days earlier, arrived and took Huxley into custody. The soldiers stood silent, heads bowed, the weight of truth settling heavy. Carson looked to the horizon where dawn's first light glowed pale against the mountains. The dark's done, Ava, he whispered. You're free now. And for the first time, she believed it. Spring returned at last. The snow melted from the pines, and the creek sang again beneath the warming sun. Carson's cabin, rebuilt from the ashes, stood strong at the edge of the meadow. Smoke rose steady from its chimney, carrying the scent of bread and pine through the clear mountain air. Ava worked in the small garden she'd planted, her hands in the dark soil, sleeves rolled and face bright with peace. Carson watched from the porch, quiet, content just to see her alive and free. You missed a row, he teased. She laughed softly. Then come help instead of watching. He stepped down, kneeling beside her. The earth was cool and alive beneath their hands. Never thought I'd call this home again, he said. Ava looked up. Home's where mercy found us. Elder Muir came out then, leaning on his cane. And where it'll stay long as you keep feeding it, he said with a smile. The three shared a warm silence, the kind that only follows storms survived. Muir's eyes glistened. Huxley's gone, justice done. But grace, that's what lasts. When he went inside, Carson turned to Eva. You ever think about leaving? She shook her head. No, I'm staying right here, with you. He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing gently around hers. The scar at her shoulder caught the sun, faint now, healed. She touched it once and whispered, It don't hurt anymore. Carson smiled. Then neither do I. A warm wind stirred the trees. The creek laughed louder. And in that quiet mountain hollow, two souls who had been lost to winter found the spring of grace waiting all along. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.